Let's welcome to the show right now as we await the president. He's about to speak any moment. Let's bring in Ohio Representative Steve Chabot. Great to have you on, sir. Your reaction to the executive order for the temporary pause now, not just on those seeking permanent residency, but also green card applicants. The president says he wants to protect the Americans' health and jobs as 22 million are out of work. Your reaction to this?
Yes, Liz. Well, every nation has the right to control their borders, and in the current environment, it's really even more important than ever that we regulate who's coming into the country. And under federal law, the president has broad authority to regulate immigration enforcement, and so I think he's doing the right thing, especially with these emergency circumstances. You know, right now, the government can tell American citizens that they're not allowed to go to the mall. So we certainly ought to be able to tell people that are coming into the country potentially illegally that they need to follow our laws. So I think the president's exactly right.
You know, Democrats and media critics are saying this is an attempt to divert attention away from the president's failure to stop the spread. Your take on that? I mean, here's what's going on. 75 countries around the world, 75 countries have also restricted their borders. We're looking at Europe, China, Canada, Mexico, Iran. New Zealand is getting applauded for the way it's handling its outbreak. New Zealand did block its borders as well and stop people coming in. Your take on the criticism against the president right now?
The president's doing exactly the right thing. We have the right as a sovereign nation to defend our borders and determine who comes into this country. We've been trying to enforce these laws for years with mixed results. This president is serious about it. I take my hat off to him. This is the right thing to do. We are a sovereign nation. We ought to be able to determine who comes here and who doesn't.
All right. The president is saying 20 states are moving to reopen soon. They now include Tennessee, Texas, South Carolina, Colorado, and Georgia, New Hampshire as well. Media critics say that could cause more infections. The governor of Illinois claiming people, quote, may die because the president is tweeting out liberate several states. You know, politicians and the media are getting pushback. They are earning paychecks as they criticize the protest now in 31 states, 22 million out of work, thousands of small businesses deemed non-essential. They may not make it. Your reaction to this controversy?
Well, you know, as a nation, you know, we're trying to find the right balances to reopen this economy. The president is getting some criticism, but he's trying to do it in the safest manner possible. He's issued guidelines. I happen to be on the task force about reopening the country. There are 32, I believe, members of Congress, so about 1 out of every 12 or so of us are working with the business community, the healthcare professionals, and we are listening to the experts, the medical experts, on how to do this and do it correctly. We've also got to get the economy open ultimately, and we've got to do it right. And he is delegating, as he would under the Constitution, to the local communities and the states to make the determination as to when they actually open. So it's guidelines from the president and the task force and the federal level, which will be implemented ultimately by the local folks.
You know, Attorney General William Barr is suggesting that the Justice Department will join citizens in lawsuits against states. AG Barr says there is unprecedented pressure by states on constitutional civil liberties and their rights. We're talking the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment at stake here. You know, protests are growing in about 31 states. We're tracking them. The media is slamming these protesters for not doing things like social distancing. Your reaction to that criticism?
Well, I think the Attorney General has not only the right but the obligation to protect the constitutional rights and civil liberties of the American people. He has not indicated that he is going to take action, but he's saying that if circumstances arose, well, then he would make that determination. But it's ultimately, I think the Attorney General is spot on this.
You know, we have news coming in that officials in Hawaii arrested 2 individuals for violating quarantine. It's a stunning new development there. This is also what's happening as well. Really surprising new test results confirm that 2 people were infected in Santa Clara County on February 6th. That's much earlier than initially believed. That means more people may have been infected and have antibodies. That's a remarkable finding. Also, a new study done by USC and the LA County of Public Health finds up to 55 times more cases than realized. So hundreds of thousands likely affected. But now with antibodies, that means plasma treatment. That means maybe get back to work sooner.
It does, Liz, and so there may well have been more infections at the earlier stage, and that I think that's what that California new information gives us. And what we ought to be doing is using that information. We have to know who has the antibodies and who doesn't through testing, and that's why in this latest legislation that the Senate took up yesterday and the House will be taking up tomorrow, there's $25 billion over and above what we've already put aside for testing. If we can find out who has those antibodies and use that to protect more of us, then we'll be able to make sure that there are fewer people who are infected with the virus, and especially those that are particularly vulnerable, those that have pre-existing conditions of some sort. They have heart disease, they have lung conditions, they have diabetes. They're particularly vulnerable, and we need to protect that population. So that news that we're finding out, we ought to use it.
You know, the next stage, I think there's $25 billion in testing to significantly expand testing. The president is saying 5,000 labs have ramped up and ready to go across the country. The FDA approves the first at-home test from LabCorp. The president's saying he will use the DPA to ramp up testing, but he's still getting pushback against being slow to do testing. The New York Governor Cuomo is saying, the blame game is full on. He gets it that the media is attacking the president, and even Governor Cuomo seems to be coming to the president's defense here.
Yeah, I mean, there has been so much finger pointing and politicizing of this. I think the president is right to want to have more testing. He wants to reopen the government. We and Congress basically is putting aside additional dollars to make sure that appropriate testing is being done. So I think you've got a pretty good working relationship. But as we've seen, some people are going to politicize this thing. They're going to take shots at the president. But I think when you look what he's done, he's trying to reach the right balance to keep the public safe, keep the public healthy, but at the same time, let's get this economy open and get people back to work.
Yeah, in prior pandemics and epidemics, you saw the states oversaw their testing. States also ran their own stockpiles before the Clinton administration launched the national stockpile in 1999. Your take on now Mississippi joining Missouri in suing China. Major backlash around the world against China. It's breaking out in the EU. They're saying this is really toxic. People are not believing, countries are not believing China anymore. You're seeing it happening in social media in the Middle East, in Asia, global petitions against China. Your take on that?
Yeah, I commend those states and their attorneys general for suing China. We don't know, where it's ultimately going to end up, whether they'll be successful or not. China will try to use the defense of what's called sovereign immunity, where a nation basically is able to prevent itself from being sued under many circumstances. But there are ways around this. And China has been a bad actor here. We know that this started there, whether it started in the wet markets, and I've actually introduced legislation in a bipartisan manner to prevent those wet markets from continuing to go on around the globe and endangering us here. So whether it was a wet market that started this or whether it was a laboratory, it was in China, and China has been a bad actor. They haven't been transparent. They ought to be held accountable.
All right. We got to leave it there. Steve Chabot, Congressman, thanks for joining us.